Good afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Monroe, North Carolina. It's currently 4:17 and it's 84 degrees outside. Thanks for listening. Yeah. So this is the Talk to the Masses podcast. Essentially, what we're going to do today is talk about your life story because I want to hear from as many people as possible
Okay.
about their life stories. So, hi, my name is James Dunleavy. Today we're here with,
Bryant Crisp.
and yeah. So, I got to think of a first question.
It was a cold Thursday morning when my parents drove to the hospital in Tarboro.
Yeah. When was that?
1974, late 20th century, last quarter of the century. Yeah. Good times.
Do you remember, did your parents ever tell you like what time you were born?
7:30 in the morning.
7:30 in the morning.
Yep.
Okay. And do you have any siblings?
I had two.
You had two?
I lost one. I lost my little sister in the spring of 2024. She was hit by it was a traffic accident where she was hit by a guy who was fleeing the police.
My gosh.
Yeah, we had court this week, actually, Wednesday, for that. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So, I didn't even know what to say.
That's a lot to put on you, isn't it? That's kind of a heavy answer. Well, okay, so spring of 2024 was absolutely the worst time in my life, hands down. Not even a question. My dad had cancer. He had bladder cancer, and he was undergoing treatment for that. And then on February the 8th, I was headed out of school to go do parking lot duty, and was assaulted by a student I didn't know, who didn't know me, who was, I don't know, I can't speak to, I don't know. He, for whatever reason, flew off the handle, went after me. I chose not to hit him or grab him, or as a teacher, it's a really tricky thing. And so I tried to kind of, subdue him or whatever. But in the process, I tore my MCL, complete tear of my MCL, and had a concussion that was a whole lot worse than I anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've had a concussion before playing sports in high school, but nothing like how this affected me. I was I started misspelling some things. Most of my symptoms started about a week and a half out after the incident, which is kind of strange, but apparently not that unusual. Strange to me, but not that unusual. I noticed that I was misspelling some stuff, and as an English teacher, as a writer, that's really unusual for me to do. So that was a sign that something was not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife noticed some stuff that I couldn't see. She noticed that my emotions were all off. I thought I was fine. She noticed that all my triggers were off, as far as like I would get mad about things, and I don't usually get mad. I just don't. But I would get really upset about stuff really quickly, and it was unwarranted. And my wife and my daughter was home at the time. She's in college, but she they both were very good about not taking it personally, and I would not even know what I was doing. So it would, like, I was also having memory loss. Like, we would have a conversation, or we would talk about some stuff, and 5 minutes later, I wouldn't remember that it had happened. Obviously, that was concerning.
Mhm.
Was diagnosed with depression from two different doctors. Had to go see a therapist, which was an interesting prospect because I think maybe if I don't usually like to generalize, but I think your generation is more open to being aware of and trying to address mental health issues than my generation was,
For sure.
and certainly my parents' generation. And that's good, that we're starting to be aware of these things. So for me, there was always a stigma of going to therapy or whatever, and I'm really glad I did. I mean, hands down, I'm really glad I did. It was a very helpful. I went through a couple of therapists, but my second therapist was very helpful.
Mhm.
And the same day that we had a lot of stuff that happened right at the same time. Several family issues on the very same day. They were just like major things. My little sister, that happened on a Thursday. My little sister came up to visit me on Saturday. She lived in Morehead City, so 5-hour drive. So we didn't get to see each other all that often. And she dropped everything, drove 5 hours, and next thing I know, she's sitting here. We spend the whole day together, and I don't remember exactly. We spent hours together, and it was really, really good. We talked about a lot of goofy stuff. She was an amazing human being, very funny, very artistic, very creative, very humble. She was a neat person. And that was the last time I got to see her. And then that was March 3rd was when she had her accident, and she hung on for a week. And then on the 10th, she passed. And so that was, the spring of 24. And it has definitely affected me in a whole lot of ways. I think it has changed kind of my outlook on a lot of different things. If you ever want to come to terms with your mortality, lose a sibling, that's a heavy thing, I know, but there are blessings from it, from some of the stuff that happened as well. Like, for example, if I hadn't have been assaulted, I would not have gotten that day with her. And I will always treasure that day that we had. And beyond that, as a teacher, as somebody who deals with students who often have mental health issues, it was one of those things that really kind of allowed me to connect with people in a way that I was always tried to be sensitive to students' needs, and if somebody told me they were going through some stuff, I always tried to, to be there for them. But I think I understood depression and mental health struggles in a way that was entirely different than, had I never gone through some of that stuff. So, maybe that helped me. Maybe that helped me reach somebody. And if it did, then it served a good purpose. So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's very heavy. And you said it was your wife and your kids that were like there for you.
Oh yeah. And obviously not. I mean, because they were living with it every day. My wife said that the person she sent to work that morning never came home, and I guess in a lot of ways, that's probably true. I've come a long way since then, you know, but and my wife and my sister were my wife and my daughter and my sister were all amazing, but Myers Park, my school, was amazing as well. I mean, the school, there were parents who set up a meal train that I didn't even know, like that had kids at Myers Park that I had never taught. And you talk about making you like kind of putting you on your heels for just a minute. It's like it was powerful that so many people cared so much, and they really did. My school family was amazing. My teacher friends at school, admin at school, absolutely amazing. My church was amazing, but and I don't know. Probably it would have been a lot different had I not had a good support group, of course.
Mhm.
But I'm glad I did.
So you had this tough time in spring of 2024. You said that was the low of your life.
Yep.
Like, what were the big things that kind of got you out of it, and like what was kind of telling you that, things would get better?
The thing about um, the thing about having and I guess I should say that like that was we all carry burdens, and sometimes I feel like when I talk about some of this stuff, it's almost like I'm the only one that's ever been through something difficult, and I know that's absolutely not the case. That's absolutely not true. I mean, we all carry, we never know what the person sitting next to us has been through. But as far as how I knew I was coming through it, which is a really weird thing, when your brain is not working properly, what I experienced was my brain was telling me I was fine, you
Yeah.
know, but I would say and do things that were completely out of character, but my brain was like, that's, you know,
Was it like that's your normal you, or that these things weren't happening?
well, my brain felt like, this feels weird talking about my brain separate from me. I felt like I was okay. I felt like I was responding appropriately. I felt like I was emotionally stable, but everybody who knew me well was watching me, and they were telling me things. And I guess, to be completely fair, I trust my wife explicitly. We don't even always necessarily agree. Of course we don't. No two people in a couple ever will on everything. But I know that my wife is absolutely brilliant, and she just is. And I know that she has my best interest at heart, in the same way that I have hers, and maybe more so. She's just such a selfless person, and so I trust her when she tells me things, even if I don't agree with her, even if I don't see it. I trust her when she tells me stuff,
Mm.
and she would tell me like, "You're doing this," or "You're whatever," and I didn't like to hear it, but I had to. I mean, I had to take her at her word, because I just do. So I think she was a really good barometer for me for like how I was doing. I think you have to have somebody to. I think you have to have somebody that you trust, somebody that can be your lighthouse or your compass, or your North Star kind of thing. And because the scariest thing for me about going through all of this was not, I might not get better. It was not, things might not change. The scariest thing for me in all of it was when I started doubting reality. And that sounds crazy, but when I felt like what I'm, when I kind of got to a point where I was like, my brain is not working right, and what if the things that I'm seeing and experiencing are not truthful? What happens when I wake up? Would I want to wake up? That to me was the scariest part. Legit.
Gosh.
But like I say, I mean, I've had a really good life. I've met a lot of amazing people. I've got, wonderful people in my life, and we, I think in a lot of ways, going through something like, the loss of my sister and all of this stuff just helped me to see people in a little different way.
Yeah, it's almost like I feel like with every like shift of life perspective,
Yeah.
although it's like obviously comes with some very tragic, very dark things, like sure will bring some light to some new things.
Yeah.
So maybe a new perspective on life.
I think in a lot of ways, yeah, you learn to appreciate things, which feels kind of cliche to say that, but you do learn to appreciate things. And on the one hand, I feel like when you talk to people about stuff like this, on the one hand, it feels kind of like trauma dumping, and in a sense, it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, one of the things that I have kind of come to learn is that we need to talk about stuff sometimes. Guys are, we're terrible, and like I said, my generation is not great about talking about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But my students, I mean, I have lost a surprising number of students in my teaching career. Far too many at their own hand, and so kids are going through things, and as a teacher, you feel, right or wrong, you feel responsible. You certainly feel responsible for them while they're in your room, but you feel responsible for things. Honestly, you feel responsible a lot of times for things that you can't control, because you care about these kids that are sitting in your room, and they're going through things that you just don't know, and I think one of the things that some of this, has allowed me to do is, like, when I talk with my classes about stuff that I've done, it's not like I don't know, in a weird way. I mean, in a weird way, it shows them that it's okay to talk about stuff,
Yeah.
you know, um, and it doesn't make you a bad person just because you had a rough patch, It's the thing about, one of the things I've learned is that when it comes to grief, and always folks, we're going, when it comes to grief, grief is one of those emotions that is at the same time universal but incredibly isolating, which
Yeah.
is kind of ironic because we've all felt grief. We've all lost people we loved. We've all, dealt with loss and these deep feelings. But when you're in the middle of that, you, or me, I guess, I often don't feel like, okay, I can go talk to this other person because they know what it feels like too. It feels like I'm separated from everybody. It's like
Yeah.
grief has a way of making you feel separate and isolated. And I don't know if that has allowed me to talk one kid out of hurting himself or herself, then, I have to feel like that's worth it.
It has to be worth it. Well, because like grief is such a interesting thing because I feel like when something tragic happens,
Mhm.
simultaneously have like this big group of people that are like, oh man, I want to talk about this, or like, oh, I want to help you out, or you get like the same five buzzword answers, or
Yeah.
like, oh man, let me, what can I do for you? Oh my
Right.
gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh,
Let
I'll
me
be
fix it.
thinking of you. And it's like,
Mhm.
you know, I just wish like,
Mhm.
yeah, can you fix it? Like, can you make it so that this didn't happen?
Right.
And the answer is almost always no,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But gosh, it's so tough. But I think Jimmy Carter, the comedian, not the president.
Okay. Okay.
He once said, "Grief is the price we pay for love. If
Yeah.
it would be sad if we never had it." So
Yeah. I once heard it described as the love you didn't get to share yet. I like I like those. In as much as you can like a definition of grief, I like those definitions. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think it's also just tough to describe a feeling.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, holy smokes, I learned a lot about myself, even at my age. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I was learning things about how my brain worked and how I processed emotions, and and I'm a pretty reflective guy, so I kind of felt like I sort of had it kind of figured out. Um, but yeah, I mean, and you start to see your impact on other people too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think one thing that's interesting about being a teacher is like you only get what, an hour, maybe an
Yeah.
hour and some change with those kids
Yeah.
every day, but you see them every day for the course of a year, maybe a few years, depending on if see them around.
True.
Are there any like kids that you've like changed them or shed a positive light?
So I grew up on a farm. This sounds like a really random way to answer this. I grew up on a farm, and I remember my daddy talking about one time how when you're farming, and this was years ago, but when you're farming, and you're going along on the tractor, you're planting or you're preparing the ground or you're spraying or whatever you're doing, you can look behind you and you can see what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And you tend that field over the course of a season, and you watch those crops grow, and you can't control everything that affects them. You can't control how much it rains. You can't control how much sun they get. You can try to optimize conditions as much as you're able, but a lot of it is out of your hands, and it's a lot of hoping and praying that you're going to get rain when you need rain, and you're going to get sun when you need sun. But the thing about and you're there at the end of the season too, when you harvest that crop, and you have measurable results, and you'll know, we're getting this many bushels per acre, and it was a good season, it wasn't a good season, but you're there for that entire process, that entire lifespan, of that crop. And the thing about teaching is that, you're one person in a long chain of teachers who is working with these particular students.
Mm-hmm.
Like you think about all the students that you have over the course of your educational career. And, so as a teacher, you often, you're with people for a short period of time. Some of those students you get very close to because they need, they open up and they share things, and they need somebody at that point that, like, maybe they need some advice on something, or maybe they just need somebody to sit and listen to them, or maybe they just need to feel like there's an adult who, sees them and thinks they're pretty cool. And as a but when they leave that class and they go on and do whatever they do for college or career or military or trade school or whatever they do, and then go off and get a job, a lot of times, the vast majority of my students you never see again,
Mm-hmm.
which is a hard thing, because I do care a lot about my students. I feel like I wouldn't be a very effective teacher if I were in it for the
You didn't
paycheck.
care about them?
If I didn't care about them, if I was there for the paycheck and it was like, that's whatever.
I don't feel like any teacher's there for the paycheck.
Oh, geez, oof, yeah. And so you every time I walk through that door, it's a promise to those kids sitting on the other side that I'm going to give you the absolute best I've got to give today, you know, and it this is going to be you're going to get my best effort every day I walk through that door. But like I say, a lot of those folks you never hear from again. Some you hear from years later. Some you keep in touch with. Some are incredibly close friends of mine to this day. It is, of course, gratifying to see your students go on and do big things. As to how big of a part you as one teacher in a long chain might have had, I don't know that there's any way to measure that, but you like to think that you impact people. You have to feel that something you're doing is worthwhile and making a positive difference.
Mhm.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of like the tough part about teaching is you have to say goodbye, and you have to, they're your kids, and you feel so protective over them for a short period of time, and then they're on to do bigger and better things.
Yeah, and then like I know that me personally, once I got to high school, at least the later stage in high school, I was like, this is a lot of BS.
Yeah,
Because like I felt like I was getting forced to do a bunch of things like
yeah,
that I didn't want to. Like I was like, man, I know how to read.
yeah,
I can write. Why do I gotta write this like 7-page paper about something I don't even care about? Um, and I was terrible at it. But like, if you're a link in that chain of
yeah,
commands, like it's got to be tough sometimes to get those students to even like trust you or trust the process, because like personally, I feel like I had a plenty of teachers that I was like, how can you care about me if like
yeah,
you don't even like I had so many teachers that wouldn't even look at my IEP or follow my IEP. Um, and that was just in itself incredibly frustrating.
yeah,
And of course, like all the teachers like have their own teaching styles, and it's gonna resonate with some kids more than others. But like I know
yeah.
that there are some teachers that I felt did not, um, accommodate to what I needed. Maybe that's the public school system, but
Well, I think okay, so and that might be opening up a can of worms too. But I think part of our issue with education, man, that's a, is like, and I should say this up front, like I'm absolutely a staunch believer in the power of public school. I did I attended private school through the 6th grade. Went to public school 7 through 12, and it was very different for a lot of reasons, but it was very different. Seeing it as a teacher, one of the things that I've seen over 30 years roughly of teaching is that, and 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 I should also say, having worked as an educational consultant in like 37 states, so I've seen what schools look like in other states. I know what
Mhm.
it looks like in Florida and Texas. I spent a lot of time in Florida and Texas, but I spent time in Washington State and New York and all over the country. And it was eye opening. But I think what happens is we don't support public schools the way they're designed or the way we should. And so one of the things that happens is that we underfund. I mean, look at the Leandro case in North Carolina. Our state legislature is not keen on supporting public schools. They just haven't been. And that's, we've been used as political pawns. We've been insulted. We've been demeaned. We've been publicly not misunderstood, misrepresented. Uh, in a lot of really powerfully insulting ways. But I do think that a lot of those kind of forces have combined to a point where we have classes that are larger than we should.
Mhm.
how do I teach writing to a class of 35 students? When you stop and that's just one class,
Yeah.
when you stop and consider the amount of time it takes to go through an essay and give the kind of feedback that you need to give, like 10 minutes an essay, if something like that, maybe if you spend that, you can't spend that long, but if you spent the kind of time that you needed, there's just not enough hours in the day to do that. And a huge part of that is we just don't support public school the way we should. Now, maybe there's some things about public school that could be, redesigned. But that's a whole big can of worms to get into. Like, what's right, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed about schools. But at the end of the day, I do think schools are an incredibly powerful tool for helping to create a community that is relatively free of crime. I mean, like, the more educated a community is, the less crime, the lower the crime rate is. Or, you increase literacy rates, and all of a sudden you're the types of jobs that kids are able to pursue, the types of interests they're able to go after, all of that opens up. And yeah, I'm idealistic about a lot of things. I completely acknowledge that. But yeah, I mean, I am a huge advocate for public schools. I think they're a phenomenal tool that we need to support.
Yeah. And it's just like, this is the future generation.
Yeah.
So what, like, you said you consulted in like 37 states. What are the states that are getting it right, and what are the states that are really getting it wrong?
Oh, yeah.
And what's the difference?
No, that's a phenomenal question. And like, one of the things you hear a lot of people argue about are teacher unions. And there are certainly multiple perspectives on teacher unions. From a basic economic perspective, North Carolina, for instance, pays its teachers toward the bottom nationally.
It's one of the worst, right?
It's one of the worst. It is one of the worst. And when we have had pay raises, they have not kept up with cost of living. Our pay is actually, our steps are frozen from like year 15 to 25, somewhere in there. And so you get to a point in your career where you've been doing this for a while, and all of a sudden you realize that relative to, your purchasing power, you're making less than you did a decade earlier, which is bizarre. You shouldn't have a job that pays you, but, and then part of the whole thing, from a basic economic perspective, if you want to attract good educators, you have to make the profession appealing. And over the course of the 3 decades that I've been in schools, we have, our state legislature, for example, has taken away benefits, I remember when McCrory when he spent a brief stint as our governor, he took our longevity pay, rolled it into our base pay, and then publicly congratulated himself for giving teachers a raise. But it was no additional money. It was just, I'm going to take this extra check that you were getting, I'm going to take it from your right pocket, put it in your left, and now, ta-da, you have more money. Or the North Carolina lottery is another situation where it was designed, or it was sold to the public as, we're going to use this as a tool to raise money to put in education, because we're going to use it, this is going to be a priority. And less than 15 minutes before the vote happened, the language in the bill that stipulated that the amount of money that the legislature had been allocating toward education, couldn't go down. That language was stripped. And so what has happened has been, a lot of the money that the state was allocating toward education has then been spent other places. The lottery money gets added to that pool, but the pool's not really any bigger than it was. And now, the lottery can say, "Hey, we've given all these millions of dollars to education," and that's true, but it was a bait and switch, and they're not. It's that happened in Florida. I saw that happen in Florida before it ever happened in North Carolina. Well, before it was even proposed as a solution here in North Carolina. I
Have,
think
sorry to interrupt,
no,
but
you're
have you
fine.
heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson's theory on educational lotteries?
I'm not sure I have.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson, when I think he was talking on some other podcast about um, there has to be some sort of lobbying that has told schools not to teach statistics,
Hmm.
so that people will still buy, people will still try and buy lottery tickets, even though that the statistics are strikingly
They are
low.
they are low.
Um,
Um, I don't know. I would argue there's a lot of statistics classes that kids just don't take or aren't interested in. It's kind of
yeah,
like you hear the argument about, I wanted to, I need to learn things about like how to do my taxes. Show me a 17-year-old that wants to know how to do taxes. We talk about it in school.
yeah.
We talk about it, but show me a 17-year-old that pays attention to that and like, you know, but to your question about states that things that different states are getting right and getting wrong, um, man, there's such a hodgepodge. There are some states that are certainly getting better results on state testing um, than other states. I think sometimes we rely way too much on testing. Um, Man, it's a big question. It's a
It's
huge
also
question.
like, what do you deem success? Like, oh, my kid can do long division that
Right.
they're never gonna do ever again in
Right.
their life because they're gonna become Leonardo da Vinci or whatever.
True. Or
I think that
quadratic equations.
we should like almost advertise classes and be like, advertise how we can make this class like fun or
Yeah.
educational or, you know, and then I also think that we should have like maybe we did at my school, but we never had like this is a life skills class.
Yeah.
Here you learn how to do your laundry, and then here you learn how to make an omelet, and
Right.
here you learn how to do your taxes.
Yeah. Well, now, and taxes is part of like econ classes
Hmm.
typically, but the other things were historically part of home ec classes that we don't have anymore. Part of the problem is reality is we don't have a lot of people who want to go into education, and
Hmm.
because we don't have a lot of people that want to go into education, and because states aren't willing to, I mean, the largest piece of the budgetary pie for any state budget is education. It just is. And so I recognize that even as I say, states aren't really willing to pay what they're supposed to pay. I mean, and again, you look at the Leandro case, which now,
What is that?
so there was a case that looked into how much per pupil spending North Carolina was doing, and was it meeting the needs for North Carolina students? And there are certainly students in underprivileged areas that were really, I won't say suffering is kind of a loaded word, I guess, but their education they weren't getting quite the same education that somebody like the school that you went to. It was a whole different experience for them. I
Yeah.
mean, I went to a very rural school, and I felt like my school was a very good school, but I also know that there's some schools where it's not as. Anyway, long story short, the Judge Leandro found that North Carolina was spending way less than we should in order to provide an adequate education for our students.
Hmm.
And so he ordered that the state up the amount that was paid per pupil, and the legislature balked at it for like over a decade now. I think it's been. I can't remember the original date. And then recently, annulled the verdict. That's probably not the correct language for it, but they found a way to not only ignore the verdict, but make it so that it now had whatever teeth it might have had are gone. Anyway,
Do you know what the price per pupil is, like off the top of your head?
oy, I think in North Carolina it's somewhere between 1,300 and 1,600 per pupil. Now I could be way off, but I think that's the last figure I saw. You know, but I mean, part of what we're seeing, at least in North Carolina, is that when you have teacher openings, you just don't have a lot of people lining up to get a job.
Yeah.
Because we're not making it appealing, and if you know, anyway. So, which one of the things that as a teacher, you're like, I can't. Can I change the system? It's because I think a lot of teachers go into education fairly idealistically. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to, do
Yeah.
all these things. And I'm going to change the way education works. And
It's so optimistic.
it is incredibly optimistic, but I feel like that's part of what makes a person decide to be a teacher, because I feel like I can make a difference in those kids. And that's one of the reasons why I started the film program, because we teach the same way we taught 100 years ago in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. And schools don't look that different than they ever did. They're based on what we'd call a factory model. And a lot of kids, I was noticing in my English classes, I grew up reading, loved to read, loved to write, but not everybody grew up that way. I grew up and became an English teacher. And I saw kids in my English classes who were very bright, very creative, whatever, very good communicators, but just didn't enjoy reading, didn't enjoy writing, certainly didn't enjoy, the testing aspect of it. And so I felt like, well, at its core, English is about storytelling, the art of connecting with somebody else. And to me, that's the thing that makes civilization possible. That's the thing that makes community possible. That ability to story tell. We pass lessons that way. We pass our histories that way, family stories that way. And so if I could teach using a different type of text like film, which is more accessible for a lot of kids, and kind of backdoor the educational part of it,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we're using what are legitimately some sophisticated texts to analyze author's intent and all kinds of techniques, for storytelling. Some pretty high level conversations. We had some really high level conversations about how to structure stories and elements that need to go into stories and how to connect with an audience and how to use these tools to engender particular effects. And kids that never connected with a print text all of a sudden were like plugged into film, which was, I think that's one of the things that we need to do. I mean, like I'm a firm believer in the use of film as a teaching aid.
Well, also one thing that I feel like has changed over the past 100 years is like how we take in information.
Yeah,
'Cause like when there were only books,
yeah,
we only read books and that was what you got.
yeah.
And sometimes we had, probably had pictures and whatever, but um, I know so many more people that are now like visual learners. Not that I was alive 100 years ago, I wasn't, but
Yeah, no, true.
but I do think there are like so many more kids this year, I know especially me, that are learning stuff through YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's right
Oh,
there.
well.
And so if somebody's like, hey, there's this 800-page book and you need to sit and look at words for hours.
Right.
I know my first, I was just like, there's zero chance that I'm going to go home and do
I gotta
that.
know that.
Um,
Yeah.
but if somebody's like, hey, go home and watch Dune and tell me what you think, then I can see a higher probability of kids going, oh yeah, I think I can do that.
Here's the most important thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy. When you tell a story, or when you receive a story, when you listen to a story, you learn to see the world from a different perspective.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, you can only know your own life experiences, right? But if I read a story from somebody who grew up in World War II era Poland, all of a sudden now, I can start to put a face with once we start to kind of see, wow, personalize these experiences. Um, I think it's I think it's easy to. I'll go so far as to say I think it's easy to hate people you don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to dismiss people you don't know or don't understand. And the more you learn about other cultures and the more you learn about, other people who have different belief systems than you, and all of a sudden you start to realize, you start to think about your own, and you think, why do I think the things I think? Why have I just blindly accepted certain things? And all of a sudden you're thinking about life in a whole different way. And that empathy is what makes community possible. Like, I want to say it was Margaret Mead, who was one of her students, asked about, what was the earliest sign of civilization as an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist. And she talked about it in the sense of a healed bone, like a healed femur, for example.
Hmm.
And I can't remember if she used the example of a femur or a skull, but the point is the same, in that this was, an incredibly old bone. So we're talking what we would consider like cave people, that kind of thing, Neolithic people. And to be injured meant that you were no longer able to provide for the group. And so your usefulness from if you want to use like a Marxist perspective, your usefulness to the group was gone.
Yeah.
And yet this bone showed signs that it had healed, which meant somebody cared about them. Somebody did what was necessary to protect them, to look after them long enough for them to get back to quote unquote normal. And she said that was the earliest indication of community. And I guess I would argue that it came even before that, because, when we stop and think about how connections are formed, they're formed by shared experiences and things that like I know in my own family stories. I know stories about ancestors that I never met,
Right.
who were long dead by the time I came along. But it gave you a sense of being part of a lineage, part of a community, part of a family. You know,
And then also like, you know, is important in the sense of like the butterfly effect.
yeah,
Whereas like, if my mom's mom like didn't move to,
yeah,
wherever,
oh yeah,
then I would not have lived here, and then
yep,
this thing would have happened, and then this thing would have happened.
yep.
Um, so yeah, I think it's like long family lineages, it's a funny word, um, are important to like tell the story of like, okay, how the hell did we actually get here? Um,
Fair.
and so, yeah,
Yeah, my granddaddy was a bombardier and a navigator in a B-25 in World War II, stationed in Corsica, and he went over after all his training and everything. After he graduated college, he got sent over on June 3rd, 1944, and he flew 35 missions as a bombardier, 35 as a navigator. Your tour at the time, the military had these metrics that you had to fulfill in order to be, to finish and to be able to go home. And a tour was 70 missions. Now, like on a B-24, your lifespan was 16 missions. Those guys, that was a whole different, that was
Mhm.
But on a B-25, which was a better plane, and for a variety of reasons, if you flew 70 missions, you could go, you were done and you could go home. So he volunteered for a lot of missions in order to finish up his tour a little bit early.
Mhm.
And the, like the day or so after he finished, a crew that he flew with a lot, so when he was volunteering, he'd fly with some different crews. And usually you would be attached to the same guys, but he was filling in for guys. So the flight after he finished, these guys got shot down in the Brenner Pass and they all died. That was on January 18th, 1945. And if he had not volunteered for one of those missions that he volunteered to go on, just one, I might not be here.
Yeah.
Kind of give you goosebumps think about it. But
Yeah, I think I don't know, it's nearly impossible to be like where we are now, like statistically, for you to be born. And like
crazy.
if you want to like expand your mind and get into like the super existential um part of that, which we can go there, but it's
Why not? Let's do string theory next.
yeah. Um but yeah, I mean it's just I don't know.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a reminder that the choices that you make matter. And you don't always know the outcome, but you know that the choices that you make matter.
Are there any um choices, good or bad, that you made that like came back to you
Oh, all the time.
that you were like, damn, I hadn't thought about that in like a decade or two?
um, I think, oh my goodness, so it's almost like I've got so many going through my brain right now that I can't even pick one. But have I experienced my choices coming back to bite me? Absolutely. Or to come back in a very positive way? Absolutely. Like, for example, I'll just use education as an example. I never intended to go into education. Everybody who was in a position, I guess, to influence me, maybe when I was in high school, encouraged me not to go into education because, you know, I did really well in school. School was easy for me in ways that maybe it wasn't for some other people, whatever. But that meant that there was an expectation, and the expectation was you have to be successful, and successful meant be a doctor or a lawyer, and nobody liked lawyers, so that meant be a doctor.
Hmm.
And so I thought that was what I was supposed to be. And then one day as a freshman, I remember and in my dorm room sitting there with a yellow legal pad and from the student store and had the little logo up at the top and everything. And I remember having just read an article like a couple of days earlier about how the average American dad spent 15 minutes per week with his kids. And I was horrified.
Hmm.
And I know that whatever else I wanted in my life, I wanted to be a dad. I just always wanted to be a dad. And I remember thinking, am I doing what's going to allow, am I right now doing the things that are going to allow me to be the kind of dad that spends more than 15 minutes a week with his kids? And so, me as a freshman, 18, 19-year-old freshman, I'm sitting there with a yellow legal pad and I start writing down a 2-column list. And this is what I think my day would be like as a doctor. I mean, what do I know? But this is what I think my day would be like as a doctor. And then on the other side, it was, what's going to make me happy? And I remember sitting there looking at those lists, and they were not at all the same. And I knew at that point that I probably didn't need to go in education. Or did not need to go into medicine. that if my goal was to be there for my kids, um, you know, and establish those relationships, then I needed to do something else. And so that was one of the biggest decisions of my life. Switching from, I was pre-med in zoology, then I switched to secondary biology education, and then I switched to secondary English education, and then I spent most of my career teaching film. So
That's a lot of jumps.
that's a lot of jumps. That's a lot of jumps. But I mean, that's one choice that my life right now is drastically different in a lot of ways than it would have been if I had gone into medicine. You know, I was good at science. I was good at math. I went to governor's school for math. I went to summer ventures for vertebrate physiology. I was one of 2 students from North Carolina to go to the National Youth Science Foundation in Bartow, West Virginia. Um, and then went into English. Not to say I left all the other stuff behind, just that, you know, because now I tutor more in math than I do in English. It's kind of funny.
Interesting.
Uh,
So like growing up, like what was the kind of family dynamic you had?
So I grew up on a farm, as I mentioned, and so that meant that you grew up into your job.
Hmm.
There was no looking for a summer job. There was, this is what I need you to do today.
Well, where was this?
This
Was
is
it in,
about 100 miles east of Raleigh, close to a little town called Oak City.
okay.
Not really close to anything. It's eastern North Carolina, so you know it's a lot of farmland. North of about 40 minutes north of 40 minutes north of Greenville, North Carolina. South of Ahoskie, where 11 and 125 intersect. Um, but I mean that was a good thing though. You know, like my family didn't believe in video games. So it's the coolest thing when I got to go to my friend's house who had video games. That's so cool. But didn't believe in video games. Didn't believe really in a lot of television. Didn't like. I got in trouble if I was. I say this, and my parents would probably disagree with me, but there was an expectation that they not walk in and find me in the house watching TV.
Yeah.
So I spent most of my childhood outdoors. I mean, I would go for some of my early recollections are going for, and whether this is accurate or not, I remember going for like a week at a time without putting on a pair of shoes. I remember learning to drive. I don't remember learning to drive. I remember driving when I was tiny. Like I remember driving tractors miles down the highway, hauling trailers or whatever, when I was too small to sit on the seat and touch the pedals. You know, like had to stand and drive. So by the time I got to high school, yeah. So by the time I got to high school and went through driver's ed, that was cake. That was nothing.
Yeah.
I could drive as well backwards as forwards. I mean, because it's backing up so many trailers, you know. But it was we raised animals, some animals. We had a few horses over the years. We had a couple ponies. We had for over the years. We had goats. We had chickens. We had a few pigs, some sheep. When I was very small, there were a few cows, but that was not anything I was ever old enough to deal with, and they were gone by the time I grew up a little bit. Lots of dogs and cats, lots of outbuildings to explore, lots of using your imagination. In fact, when I was in school, the first day of, when I got to high school, by that point, first day of hunting season, everybody skipped school to go hunt. First day of doe season, everybody skipped school to go hunting. You'd look in the parking lot, and it's true what people my age say. Like you would look in the parking lot and you would see trucks, a lot of trucks, with gun racks in the back window. And they always had 2 racks because one of them was for a shotgun, one of them was for a rifle. And I mean, just that's just what it was. I grew up in an area that was, I mean, it was a very small community. And of course, I wasn't even in town limits. The closest town was 1 mile square. We did get a stoplight. I remember when we got that.
Was that exciting?
It was exciting. I remember people watching it change, and one of them later became mayor.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was good stuff. but you knew everybody. You knew, not only did you know them, you knew their histories. You knew who lived in every house. You knew who used to live in every house. You knew, like, this house over here that the Butlers lived in, that was the house that my great granddaddy built. It was at the time, it was 3 stories. It was the biggest house in Oak City, and that's where the preacher stayed when he came around. There's a lot of history. It was the kind of place where I told friends in college, it was like, I felt like I could walk around a corner at any given time and run into my great granddaddy because there was like, I remember plowing peanuts one time, and I'm out there on on the tractor plowing peanuts, and this storm's coming up. So I pull under an old tobacco barn, and one of those old square tobacco barns, and just stood under the shelter while while the storm went past.
Mm-hmm.
But on the tin, I was looking at it. There was all these penciled in this writing and numbers and stuff, and I realized that was probably my great granddaddy figuring out how much he was going to make on a load of tobacco or something, like 50 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So I grew up with a real appreciation of history and a deep understanding of my place in that history, because my family was there for generations. Apparently, one of my sisters did a DNA thing and a DNA test, and like our DNA was some of the oldest in that area, just because I had an ancestor come over on the Mayflower, and when they settled in that area, they just stayed. So, then yeah. So anyway, it kind of made leaving when I got married a challenge. But I feel like because we knew we wanted to be close to one set of family, and we knew that we wanted opportunities for our kids that, as parents, you always want your kids to have all the best opportunities.
Sure.
So when we were looking at it, it was like, well, we can stay close to my parents or your parents. And when we got to thinking about it in terms of the kids, it was like, well, this would give them opportunities that I didn't have, maybe. So I don't know. It was a hard choice, and it's, it just is what it is, but it,
Are you satisfied with the choice that you made? I mean, your kids are in college.
Yeah. And I think you play a dangerous game with regret.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Because you can't change things you never did. Like there's if I there's times I would like to go back and be able to spend a little more time with my sister.
This is a plane like right there.
Yeah. When they have the air show, it's awesome. We'll have Zeros or P-51s come fly over the house. There's a lot I'd like to go back and maybe do differently, but the thing is, you have to trust that the decisions you're making are the right decision in the moment with the information that you got, and you start regretting stuff, and that's a dangerous game. So do I feel like my kids had a good life here? Yeah, I feel like they had a great life here, and best life I could provide for them. Did we have challenges and struggles? Yeah, primarily financial, because, 2 parents in education, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But we've been able to position our kids to go on and do things that Penny Beth and I never had the opportunity to do, which is great. As a parent, man, that's awesome. I want my kids to do better than me. I want them to go off and do something more impressive.
I think it's crazy here, and like I've heard a few stories about like kids, and they're like, I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college, and they didn't want me to go to college. And like for me, that's crazy because I like almost I think my entire family has gone to go to college.
Yeah.
And then when I decided not to, well, first of all, there's like a lot of prerequisite information. I was not good in school. But I was a smart kid.
Yeah.
I just didn't know how to
You
do
still
like the
are.
schoolwork.
You still are. Don't talk about yourself in the past tense.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I'm not in high school anymore, so
Yeah,
that's
true. True.
that's good. But I decided not to go to college, and
Yeah.
my family was like, finally, for deciding
Mhm.
that. One, for financial reasons, because college is stupid expensive now.
It is.
But it's
It
just
is.
like to like make the decision that's different than the status quo
Yeah.
for like self-fulfillment, I
Yeah.
think is very important.
Yeah.
To feel comfortable doing that. And I'm very lucky to have had that. And so,
Yeah. No, that's a powerful.
yeah.
Yeah. I wanted my goal as a parent. Our goal as parents was to put our kids into a position where they could make choices, you know, and if they wanted to do this or if they wanted to do that, then they were positioned to be able to do that. We didn't want doors to be closed to them. So, you know, I got my son's in school now, finishing up his doctorate. He's going to be a doctor of physical therapy, and my daughter is right now doing the same thing. And
You have two kids?
yeah, I have two kids. My son's 25 and married, and so I have an amazing daughter-in-law as well, which is really kind of cool. And my daughter is going to be 20 here shortly, and she's an undergrad right now, trying to decide if she definitely wants to be a PT or if she might want to be an OT, which is related, or maybe a PA, but I don't think a PA. I think it's right now kind of between a PT and an OT, an occupational therapist and a physical therapist. And I think she's kind of leaning toward physical therapy, but
She has a good study buddy.
she does. And it is so funny watching them interact because they do think the world of each other. You know, and she's already got plans to shadow him, and you know, which is really kind of cool. It was very cool. So, but yeah, so I mean, are there things that at times I should have done differently as a parent? Yeah, I mean, absolutely there were, but did I learn from mistakes that I made? Yeah, I learned from. And I'll give you an example. Because in no way was I ever a perfect parent. We don't have instruction books, and my wife, I remember one day, I remember where I was. I remember in the house, and I remember fussing at Garrett about something, and I remember my wife stopping me. And as a dad, you're thinking, well, she's got to agree with me, and she's got to support me, and we got to have that united front against this 4-year-old standing in front of us, And she stopped me and she said, you need to stop. You need to the very thing, or the very things that he was doing that were annoying me, that seemed so important in that moment, were things that I did, and I just didn't see it. And I think that's what we do a lot, is we project, but I was fussing at him for things that I did. Where did he learn it? He learned it from me,
Yeah.
And I have never felt so small, because in that moment I realized I'm sitting here yelling at my kid, yelling at a 4-year-old as a, what, that's, and so I apologized. I feel like that's important, and I owned it, and I learned from it. And it definitely, that one conversation changed how I parented. But that goes back to what I told you earlier. I trust her. I trust Penny Beth. And when she tells me something, I listen to her. I might have a different opinion, but I always trust her.
That's good.
She's a smart woman. Despite the fact that she wound up with me, she's a very smart woman.
Yeah. So do you have any like like
Oh, this is going to be dangerous.
what told you that she was the one that you wanted to marry? Like what is like that happen and you're like this is her.
So we were, we both had the same scholarship. She was at Chapel Hill. I was at NC State. And it was an education scholarship. Now, like I told you, I was planning on using mine to go into medicine,
Mhm.
and I was going to dip out on the education part, but whatever. Um, and we, our freshman year, had to participate in a program called Discovery. And the way Discovery worked was all 400 of us from all over the state of North Carolina came together, and we started at NC State, and we got on these, we listened to some educational leaders and stuff talk to us about trends in education, really exciting stuff. And then we got on buses and we went, it alternated at the time, whether they went east or west. The year I was in it, we went west, and we toured a bunch of school systems in the west. I wound up touring Myers Park specifically on that trip, and that's one of the reasons why I came to Myers Park.
Mhm.
But the first night we were there, we were in a chemistry room, Dabney Hall, NC State campus, 222, room 222. And I had gotten there kind of early. I was by myself. I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I was sitting on row J, which was like the back row.
Crazy the things you remember.
Oh, I remember every bit of this. And I'm just sitting there watching people. I was early, because I'm always early to stuff, and I was just kind of watching people file in. And my whole plan for the evening was to sit back in the back, just kind of watch, not really interact with anybody. There's nobody even sitting beside me. And I remember looking over and watching people coming through the door, and these two girls walked in. My wife, and her friend. And the first thought that went through my head was, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And the second thought that went through my head was, what the what? Where did that come from? And they came and sat directly in front of me. And Kara, she sat right here. Penny Beth sat right here. And I was right between them, in my row right behind them. And we were listening to these different speakers. And at one point, Representative Dan Blue gets up to talk to us. And he says to us, okay, I know y'all been sitting here a long time. Y'all probably tired. Y'all tired of listening to us folks talk and all this stuff. So I'll tell you what, I want you to turn to the person sitting next to him, and I want you to tell him you're glad to see him here this evening. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is awesome because I'm going to get a chance to get a good look at her. And so I kind of leaned to kind of catch her as she turns to talk to her neighbor, because there was nobody beside me. So who am I going to talk to?
Yeah.
And instead, she looks directly at me and goes, don't I know you from somewhere? I was like, So I start naming places. Some of them I had been to, some of them I hadn't. We never did figure out why she thought she knew me, but she thought she knew me from somewhere. So the backstory to some of this is that as a teaching fellow, which is what I was, what we were, you had to go through this whole week of experience, but none of us really wanted to. But I had a plan to get out of it, because my plan was, yeah, right, because I had backstage passes to an Aaron Tippin, Brooks and Dunn, Faith Hill concert, because we knew Aaron and knew his family, and I had two backstage, and me and my best friend were going to go to this concert.
You had to go to it.
Well, you had to, but it's during that week, right? So I'm thinking, okay, well, here's what we'll do. My college roommate's mom, who, if you saw her, you could easily be, convinced that she was my mom, because she had black hair and, whatever. So we knew that would work if they had to see her, but she was going to call and tell the people in charge of the program that I was on that my great uncle was not doing so well, and my cousin was coming through to pick me up because we needed to go to the hospital and see him because we weren't sure he was going to pull through.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and so my cousin was my best friend that was going to be, you know, all this. So, but that first night after I saw Penny Beth, I was like, oh, that's a huge monkey wrench in my plans now. And my best friend can't, you know, because why would I leave if this girl, if I leave, I don't get to know who she is.
Yeah.
So, so my friend came over that evening, and we, you know, we were hanging out, and we listened to. We had some other friends that were in a band. We listened to them play a set, you know, and then I went and sat in the car with my friend, and we sat there for probably an hour and a half, and I'm just like, I can't go. What do you mean you can't go? I said, there's this girl. What do you mean there's this girl? You don't understand, man. You weren't there. There's this girl. He's like, all right. So I said, well, I'm going to give you my passes. There were two backstage passes. They were blue and white triangles that had the date and the concert name. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and they were adhesive, and you would stick them on your shirt and whatever. I said, I'm going to give you both of these. You take whoever you want to take. I don't care. But you cannot take the adhesive off the back. I want that back when you're done. He goes, okay. So he took a buddy. His buddy walked around holding that pass the whole time and couldn't stick it on his shirt. And he brought it back to me. It's on my guitar case now. But later that week, when I was expecting the phone call that now I had put a stop to, I had fallen asleep before I was supposed to go to this, like, hear another speaker. I don't remember where we were at the time, but I get up and I'm all groggy and whatever, and I hear a knock at the door, and it's a cop, and she goes, yeah, are you Bryant Christmas? Yes, ma'am. And she goes, I just want to let you know your great uncle pulled through and he's doing okay. So that whole plan that we had put in place about my great uncle going through surgery, my great uncle had died a long time before that, so we knew anyway. But yeah,
So you were getting pranked?
So no, I sort of got pranked by, you know, but anyway, but yeah, I gave up backstage passes to an Aaron Tippin, Brooks, and, well, let's see, who was the headliner? The headliner was Brooks and Dunn. Faith Hill was the second act, and Aaron Tippin was the first act. I think that's the way it worked. But yeah, I gave up backstage passes just to meet my wife, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, this is a big bet.
It was a big one.
Uh,
It was a big one. I'd do it again in a
yeah,
heartbeat.
it's a good thing.
So speaking of choices, that was a good one. That was a very good choice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
Yeah,
coming and talking with me today.
Appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you had a good time.
Had a great time.
This
Always
first ever episode.
I know.
So,
We
yeah.
set the bar really high.
Yeah. Hopefully so.
Yeah.
Hopefully more to come. That's all for today. Thank you for listening with us. Make sure you like and subscribe and share with whoever. And don't forget to donate to St. Jude.